Right now, very pleased to welcome to the show Antonia Juhasz. She is a leading oil industry expert and director of the energy program at Global Exchange. Her newest book is called Black Tide, The Devastating Impact of the BP Oil Spill. Antonia is going to be at Powell's at Cedar Hills Crossing in Beaverton tonight at 7. She'll also be in Olympia tomorrow night and Seattle on Thursday night. black-tide.org. That's black-tide.org, the website. Antonia, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
Well, I am looking forward to this interview because we have tried to stay on this issue ever since, and maybe even before. In fact, you warned that this would happen in your previous book, The Tyranny of Oil and the Bush Agenda. We're going to get to that book in a second. But right now, you just got back from BP's annual shareholder meeting in London on April 14th, and you confronted BP CEO Bob Dudley, right?
I sure did. I had actually come to London with 5 Gulf Coast residents who were there representing their communities, fisher communities, environmentalists. They came with proxies so that we could go into the shareholder meeting and confront the heads of the company. I got in as a shareholder. None of them got in. Not a single member, not a single representative of the Gulf Coast was allowed in the meeting. So when I got in there, I had to speak for all of us.
What was that winnowing process? They just knew who they were, or what? They knew who they were.
They just side by side, took them off, took them to another room and said, you can't come in. I didn't actually know this was happening when they got winnowed off.
Wow. So the proxies were no good.
Proxies were no good. I went in, realized they weren't there, and realized I had to take that opportunity to speak.
Were there other people with proxies that got in that weren't Gulf Coast residents?
Most certainly.
Okay,
yeah, plenty,
there you go.
Plenty.
So what did you? Yeah, see, okay. So what did you get to ask Bob Dudley?
I asked him why he wasn't living up to BP's financial, legal, and moral obligations in the Gulf Coast. Why he said that they could handle a blowout in deep water when they couldn't. Why he said they could handle a 300,000 barrel a day spill when they couldn't even handle an 80,000 barrel a day spill.
Right.
And what they were going to do differently in the future, because the meeting started with them saying, we're going to move further into the deep water, we're going to keep doing deep water drilling, and they didn't do anything.
But there's no evidence that they have any more capability to handle a spill next time in deeper water than this spill.
Oh, absolutely. Not at all.
Right.
The only thing that really worked in this spill at the end wasn't the cap that they finally figured out after 3 long months of figuring things out. Which we watched as the 210 million gallons of oil spilled. It was the relief well, which took 5 months to drill, because we know that oil companies know how to drill. So basically we know that what they know how to do to solve this sort of problem if it happens again is drill another well.
And
There's
they won't
no way
do that
to drill
because
it
of the money.
faster.
And Canada requires it, right?
They require much more safety measures than we do, but really, there's nothing you can't do a relief well faster. You can't do it any differently. It takes 5 long months.
Right.
So basically, we know if there's another problem, it'll take that long.
But
to address.
In the future, they're not saying we're going to drill too. They're not saying that, right?
No.
So in other words, what you're saying is that what got them out and got us out of this mess ultimately was the relief well, and they're not even going to drill that in the future.
Right.
Okay. So what did Bob Dudley say in response?
Well, Bob Dudley said that I sounded like a plaintiff's lawyer, and that he disagreed with my characterization of what was going on. One of the things that I really threw to him was that while BP is saying over and over and over again, we're taking care of the Gulf, we're putting up our money, they're fighting things like they're supposed to pay a per barrel fee when the finding's going to be that they were negligent, which they obviously were. It's a $4,300 per barrel fee. That's about a $19 billion payout that they're going to owe us. What BP is arguing that is instead they should pay a day rate, which would be the equivalent of $300 million total.
Yeah, their lawyers have all worked out these equations, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, you're not a lawyer.
And I'm not a lawyer. And not that there's anything wrong with plaintiff's lawyer.
Right.
But the other thing that I said that really he actually did respond to was I had come with a message from Keith Jones, who's the father of Gordon Jones, a young man who died aboard the rig, just 28 years old. And Keith couldn't come to London, so he gave me a statement. And what Keith's statement said was, and what I read was, your greed, your cost cutting killed my son. You were throwing the dice. You were gambling.
Sure.
You lost, and my son died.
And you got to read that?
I got to read that.
What was the response?
He, the CEO, Bob Dudley, said, we're very sorry, of course, for the loss of life. He took that opportunity to read the names of the 11 men who died, and then he moved on. And I got heckled from the audience.
Oh, really? From the shareholders?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Our guest is Antonia Juhasz. She was just back from the BP annual shareholder meeting. You heard her describe some of that. She's also the author of two great books. One, The Tyranny of Oil and the Bush Agenda. We'll get to that in a minute. Her newest book, Black Tide, is out, and she's going to be at Powell's Cedar Hills Crossing in Beaverton tonight at 7 o'clock. Now, for this book, Black Tide, Antonia, you interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people in the Gulf region. I want to start with the families who paid that ultimate price. You mentioned one of them there. 11 were killed. We often forget that. Mm-hmm. What's their feeling right now?
Well, for those that I spoke to, probably the person who has been the most vocal and adamant that I be vocal as someone who's told this story is Keith Jones. And I, on the 1 year anniversary of the explosion of the Deepwater Horizon was April 20th, just a few days ago. Right. And I spent the morning talking to him, and he was talking about Gordon's death. And his feeling is one, the country and the world have forgotten that 11 men died and paid the ultimate price. Right. But most importantly, people have forgotten why. And for him, it is the malfeasance of these companies, BP, Transocean, Halliburton, Cameron, all of them, by the way, the largest operators of offshore rigs in the world, Transocean, Halliburton, they made horrible failures in this
and blamed
accident.
each other.
And they continue to blame each other. They're all suing each other.
Right.
They all should be suing each other. They all did make horrible mistakes, all of them across the line. And that should give us great concern about the rest of offshore drilling that's still going on.
Can you stay for us with us another segment? Because one of the things I want to get into is how Congress, we reported last week, a year after, has done virtually nothing.
Right.
And this administration, I have to say, isn't. They're talking about deep water drilling again. They look to me like they just want the story to go away. But before we get there, one last question: the harm that continues to haunt us from these dispersants that were used. Who did you talk to scientifically about these dispersants, and what do they say about the harmful effects that continue?
One of the most amazing people who I followed throughout the course of this book is Dr. Samantha Joy of the University of Georgia in Athens, and she's an expert on basically oil in the Gulf of Mexico, to make it simple. And she's one of the people who I followed looking at the dispersants and trying to track Corexit. And what we know about Corexit is that it is a toxin. We know that it's banned in Europe. We know that 200 million gallons of it were applied. We also know that the oil industry had done no science whatsoever on studying it.
Right.
So we know that it's a toxin. We know that it's not good for you. What hasn't been done by the industry is really looking at what does it mean to combine one toxin, which is oil, with another toxin, which is the dispersant, then burn them together on the surface of the ocean. But what we know for sure is that the combination has led to a great deal of death in the ocean. It's also made people sick. So people have ongoing health problems, burned skin, peeling skin that won't go away. It won't stop peeling, respiratory problems, neurological problems, and there are traces of PHPs which come from oil in people's blood.
Wow. Yeah, and we're talking to Antonia Juhasz and her new book, Black Tide, The Devastating Impact of the BP Oil Spill. All the more important that you get out and listen to Antonia tonight at Powell's Cedar Hills Crossing in Beaverton at 7 o'clock, because this story has been forgotten. The cameras are away. They're covering other things, and there are a lot of dedicated people, including Antonia, a lot of whom are living in the Gulf right now, trying to keep up this story, because the effects are going to last for a long time. In studio with us, Antonia Juhasz. She is author of Black Tide, The Devastating Impact of the BP Oil Spill. Antonia, thanks for staying.
Thanks.
I think this is so important, and this is what you don't see on even a lot of the cable shows. You don't hear it on network news. They do a quick wrap-up of, what's happening a year after. Even that is cursory from what I saw. Antonia is going to be out at Powell's Cedar Hills Crossing in Beaverton tonight at 7 o'clock. If you want to hear more and ask her questions, you can also call in now, 503-248-0620, 1-866-452-0620. Antonia, one of the most troubling things is that a year plus after this Deepwater Horizon disaster, the Congress has not passed a single meaningful law in response.
Yeah. I used to work for Congress. I worked for 2 members of Congress back in the day. I know how Congress works. things were moving so swiftly when the public's attention was gripped by this disaster. That was in June, in July. This was the number one issue in polls.
Right.
And people pushed their members of Congress towards action, and there was legislation that was going to pass. Then two things happened. One, the cap was put on, which was fabulous, in July, that ended the gusher, but people were still paying attention. They still saw the oil, and they were still looking. Then, on August 16th, Carol Browner, President Obama's climate czar,